freaking first cut. Golly.
What's going on, YouTube? An emergency pod because the decision is in whether or not Matt Jones, Talor Gooch, and Hudson Swafford will be allowed to play in the FedEx Cup Playoffs. We know the answer. Hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed. We'll jump into it right now. Welcome to the First Cup Podcast. I'm Rick Gehman. That right there, our resident in-house counsel, Sia Nejad. Sia, good evening.
Good evening. Very interesting events today on a couple different fronts. I'm a little surprised. I got to be honest with you.
Kyle Porter is here. KP, I believe you described that as 2 weeks worth of content in 2 hours. It was quite magical.
It was the most fun I've had watching golf content since the final round of the Open.
Was it? I guess it was golf content.
Totally. Sia, do you charge like double time for these appearances? Like, do you charge like for the golf side and the attorney side?
That's right. Yeah, I have a formula. It's actually a little bit more than double, but it's very reasonable. My fees are very reasonable.
Okay. I guarantee you the fees that we saw today from the people that were arguing are not reasonable.
That's a fact.
We have him on retainer though, so I think we're good for a while. Okay, so here's what's going on. There was a hearing just ended in the northern district of California. Judge Beth Freeman overheard this temporary restraining order. The idea behind this, Sia, was to potentially determine whether or not Hudson Swafford, Matt Jones, and Talor Gooch were going to be allowed to play in the FedEx Cup Playoffs. There was a couple of key points that they went through, which we will go through, but it was denied, meaning that they're not going to be allowed to play.
Yeah, and I think the reason I'm surprised is I thought there were so many like different, really interesting procedural issues, especially when they got into the penalties and the appeals and that kind of thing. But to me, it just came down to irreparable harm. She didn't see this as irreparable harm for the players, and that came down to a sort of a monetary conclusion for her. I thought, and maybe the LIV attorneys didn't articulate this properly, and maybe you guys can shed some light on this. I thought the irreparable harm was two-pronged, that it was monetary, but also non-monetary. And if that's the case, then I think it would be hard for the judge to deem the non-monetary irreparable harm too speculative to not grant the temporary restraining order.
The irreparable harm, Kyle, that's kind of the big one, right? And the judge, Beth Freeman, decided she's the best, right?
She's the GOAT. Yeah, make her the czar of golf. Like, just put her in charge of golf.
She was like, "Listen, I miss 3-foot putts all the time." She wanted to know how likely it was for these guys to actually make it to the Tour Championship. Kyle,
which is a great question.
It's a great question because that's where the argument that the LIV lawyers were making is that there is all this money. There's like $75 million on the line. There's $18 million for first place. If they don't get an opportunity to compete for that, that is irreparable harm. And Judge Freeman was asking questions like, what is their current ranking? How likely is it that they make it that far, et cetera, et cetera. And that was honestly a big crux of this hearing.
I mean, she was breaking down OWGR points. I thought we were going to get into like Ricky Fowler being 125 on the FedEx Cup list. She was incredible. It was I think producer Jacob tweeted this, but to watch people who don't do this every day talk about it, it felt a little normal sportish in that you're like, this sounds absurd. Like, it sounds like complete lunatics talking about almost in like a different language. And you're like, this is what we do every day. Like, we could have gotten up there and talked 10 times more eloquently about not about everything, but about those specific things. And it's hilarious to listen to other people talk about it. That's an aside. But I think, man, the thing that I really struggled with, I am not Sia. I am not qualified to watch a courtroom hearing and talk about it. And yet here we are. There were so many different things to pay attention to. I didn't understand probably half of them. They were talking about they were just using language that I didn't really understand. And there kept being these like little rabbit trails. And I'm like, well, should I go down this trail with you? Like, is this going to lead somewhere? And then they would come back and be like, well, that's not really like the point. And you're like, what is the point? And I think we finally, and I thought they did a good job of calling it out in the middle of the process. We finally got to the point that the judge wanted to get to, which is the irreparable harm. And I thought, and I forgot who made this case beforehand, but just the point that like, players who left for LIV would have presumably factored in the fact that they were no longer going to be allowed to play in the PGA Tour or in the FedEx Cup. I don't know if Talor Gooch, who may or may not know he signed with LIV, actually did factor that in. So I felt like that was a little bit of an issue, but they would have factored that in. Now, the LIV lawyer did try to state the case for what Sia is saying, which is that there's non-monetary value from winning the FedEx Cup. He overstated that, I think, because he was starting to compare people to like Jack Nicklaus, and you're like, whoa, like he actually overstated his case by saying the FedEx Cup was like the World Series and the Super Bowl, and you're like, it was weird to hear both sides argue like how good the other side was doing because it helped their case. That was strange. I don't know. There's a million things.
I have so much. So the LIV is trying to make it seem like missing out on the FedEx Cup is the worst possible scenario because it's the most amazing tournament and it's the Super Bowl and there's so much money on the line. And the PGA Tour has to say, well, no. Actually, the FedEx Cup is not that great. Don't worry about it. And to hear them argue that is incredible. But Sia, what I think Kyle is alluding to here is both sides. This is one small hearing that is there's going to be a ton more of this. So both were almost kind of setting the table for this larger potential antitrust trial that might eventually come. So you could see them kind of branching off into different areas and Judge Freeman trying to be like, okay, like I have to make a decision on this today. Let's get back to these couple of items.
Right. And I think one of the things Kyle's referring to is when they went down that procedural road where it actually seemed like, oh, all of a sudden LIV might have something here because it was like, all right, well, as soon as Talor Gooch appealed the suspension, then that should stay everything. And so therefore he should be able to play in the FedEx Cup playoffs. Like, when they got to the end of that argument, she basically said something to, I think maybe the PGA attorneys were there up there on rebuttal. And she said something like, well, ultimately it doesn't really matter because if I don't rule that there's irreparable harm, then, none of this really matters right now. So I just thought that was really interesting. You get into a lot of sort of side roads, but at the end of the day, it did come down to, one of those big factors, the irreparable harm argument.
So do you real quick, Sia, because they got into the weeds of this. I'm looking at the player, the player handbook essentially, and it's chapter 7. I don't know what these are. Chapter 7 issue, whatever, 7C, and it's conduct unbecoming a professional. And there's a bunch of language in there, and this is what they were actually arguing in the case. The commissioner may immediately suspend the player's playing privileges. The commissioner shall inform the member of the decision to revoke the probation within 4. Like essentially it's saying that the commissioner and the PGA Tour lawyer made a really interesting case of like, if a hate speech organization wanted to sponsor, let's say Scotty Scheffler, that's an absurd thing, but he's the #1 player in the world. The commissioner could suspend him, and because it's conduct unbecoming a professional. And then sort of like you wouldn't, like the argument was, and this was all hypothetical, but the argument was you wouldn't be able to strike down a temporary restraining order because, or you would be able to strike down a temporary restraining order because having a player clothed in a hate speech organization would be detrimental to the entire organization, the entire PGA Tour, right? That was the argument that the PGA Tour lawyer was making. But she didn't really see it that way. And I'm curious if you feel like it would have gotten past the irreparable damages thing, whether the PGA Tour still would have won this sort of initial case.
Well, I think that whole provision was kind of misguided. I think when you're talking about conduct unbecoming a tour golfer, I don't really think that's meant for this. Them joining another tour is more, to me, more of a procedural thing. It's not under the purview of conduct unbecoming. Certainly you could define it that way if you want to, but I really don't think, I think the hate speech analogy is actually what that provision is probably addressing, and not somebody, basically not abiding by the handbook, the events that they're supposed to play, and conflicting event releases, all that stuff. So yeah, I just didn't think it was a really appropriate provision for what we were talking about. But to the extent it was, I did think there was some merit in the idea that, okay, well, they've appealed the decision, so we have to, everything should be stayed until that decision, there's a final decision made on that.
And that's what the LIV, and help me if I'm help me understand this correctly. That's what the LIV lawyers were arguing of, like, yes, your handbook says,
right, that's your handbook, like you wrote it, that's your stuff. And so like that should be, like, the legal argument should actually be deferential to the person signing the party, not the person who actually wrote the contract. So in other words, like, that would, to the extent there's ambiguity there, it would actually inure to the benefit of the aggrieved golfers in this case, like a Talor Gooch, for example. So again, right, I don't know, again, if you don't think there's irreparable harm, then maybe you don't get there. But honestly, I don't know that they're mutually exclusive. I think you could have said there's no irreparable harm and still, on a procedural matter, granted the injunction on behalf of the three golfers.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because that a little bit, I mean, I felt like that's what the LIV case sort of rested on, was, hey, you're not abiding by your own handbook. And then the PGA Tour side tried to force that, like, hypothetical into that, like, that part of the, like, you get to play even at, like, while you're appealing, and it didn't really work. And yet the judge still ruled in their favor, which I thought was, I thought that was super interesting. Like, I don't know that I saw that coming. I mean, we predicted today, Rick, that we thought that all three players would be allowed to play in the St. Jude.
I did too.
Yeah, I don't think she was super convinced on any of these arguments here, but it seemed to come back to the irreparable harm. And that is, Kyle, to go back to what you were saying, she felt that what the players were going to lose out on by not being able to play on the PGA Tour was calculated. That's the word that they use, calculated into the contracts that they signed with LIV. Well, if you're making up for the money that you suspected you were going to lose, that is by definition not irreparable, right? Like, it is, you have made up for that. So it seemed to be like that was the thing that pushed this to the point where it wasn't meeting the criteria that.
So real quick though, you can sign a contract, like, let's take it out of this context. You can sign a contract for, another entity. And you can do that knowing that the provisions that bind you with your former company are not legal and are not valid. I'm not saying those provisions aren't legal or valid, but the idea that they can sign with LIV, and therefore that means that they know they're going to be suspended. Well, they might have it in their mind that they're going to sign with LIV, but all that jargon coming from PGA Tour, that's not going to hold up in court anyway. So two things can be true. You can have the provisions on the front end, but you can also think that those provisions aren't going to hold up in court on the back end.
What? Tell me like I'm 5.
I just did.
Well, tell me like I'm 3.
Well, let me put it to you this way. That's funny. Let me put it to you this way. Talor Gooch signs with LIV. And he signs knowing that he is violating the PGA Tour bylaws, handbook, provisions. Well, he might be told by counsel, well, you don't have to worry about that because those provisions are not legal. They won't hold up in court. They won't hold up against a temporary restraining order. They won't hold up against an antitrust case. So you can go ahead and sign with us knowing that when we actually get to court, those provisions aren't going to be valid. And therefore, you will enjoy the LIV windfall money wise, but you will also end up getting to play on whatever PGA Tour events you want to play on.
It appears that LIV counsel has made a lot of these almost promises, Kyle. We saw Sergio Garcia to Greg Norman text messages in which Norman kind of poo-poos the idea of them losing any legal case and kind of saying, you have nothing to worry about. Talor Gooch, I'm not sure. I mean, he told us he was dumb. I think I can second that. Like, I'm not sure he knows what he signed or what he got himself into, at least with the way that this is being presented in court, or maybe it's just a lot of promises from LIV counsel that they thought they had a stronger case than at least one very small court decision is alluding to.
Yeah. And I think it was really interesting throughout to hear some of the things the judge was saying. And you're like, oh, that doesn't like she was arguing with both. Like she used the word probing both sides.
Yeah.
But the way she did it with LIV was like a little bit more hostile, it felt like, than with the PGA Tour side. And one example of that is she said, this was toward the end, I think. I've got this quote. She said, these LIV contracts, and she's now remember, like in the 106-page lawsuit, she can see the redacted stuff that we can't see, right?
She's privy to all the information. They decided, like at the very start, they decided what we are going to say and not going to say. So they did not reveal the amounts of money or some specific terms in the contract, but everyone in the courtroom knows the real thing.
Yeah. So she said these LIV contracts lock up these players in ways the PGA Tour never imagined. Like, and what she means by that is never imagined their sort of membership on the PGA Tour doing. They are so restrictive. And then she also sort of insinuated that she said LIV is calling the PGA Tour a monopoly. But really the real monopoly that hasn't been realized yet is LIV. She didn't like say those words, but there was a big time insinuation. And she also said, listen, it's not illegal to be a monopoly. It's illegal to use your monopolistic power to prevent entry or whatever the competition into the marketplace, which I thought was really intriguing. And then this sucks for the European Tour, but she used the European Tour as like, she was like, she sort of said, if the European Tour was equivalent to the PGA Tour, like they were horizontal is the word she used, then that would be using your monopolistic power against competition. But she was like, the European Tour is not that. They are less than the PGA Tour. So any partnership the PGA Tour has with the European Tour is not, again, this is, I'm reading into what she said, but is not using monopolistic power against LIV. And actually LIV is the one that is far more restrictive and far more exclusive in ways that a monopoly might be than the PGA Tour is, which I thought was really, really interesting as somebody who has, again, not seen the LIV contracts, and she actually has.
Sia, there is no way either side wants this to go to trial because discovery will be insane. When you get access to all the, I mean, we were intentionally shielded from a lot of things during this hearing, and we learned so much more about the LIV contracts than we ever knew. If this goes to trial and full on discovery, we're going to learn about text messages and emails and business practices and all this stuff that I cannot imagine either side wants to get us privy to.
So this is what I was on last week. This discovery can be so broad because the stuff you can get in discovery doesn't necessarily have to be admissible in court. It can be just broad, like it can just be stuff that may or may not, or I should say may pertain to the subject at hand, the facts at hand, the dispute at hand. And that is very, very broad. So you're right. Correspondence, whether that be via text messaging or emails, which, people will, that European Tour thing is really interesting because I think what the PGA Tour attorneys are going to say if we get to the discovery phase is, well, no, they're not allowed to get any of our correspondence to the European Tour because the judge already basically indicated or ruled that the European Tour, us conspiring with them, is not really relevant. Now, I think they would get discovery on that. But Rick, you're absolutely right. There's a lot, and on the LIV side too, as we learned today, there's a lot of stuff that makes a lot of people look bad. And sometimes it shouldn't be interpreted that way, but it kind of always is. So nobody wants to be in discovery. First of all, it will be extremely expensive. Yeah. But second of all, there'll be a lot of stuff that gets uncovered that people will not want uncovered.
A couple of things we learned. And Kyle, this is something that we've heard kind of rumored before. The LIV lawyer said in the courtroom that, quote, money won in tournaments is recouped against the contracts, which has kind of been a big sticking point. And Brandel Chambly was talking about it a lot a couple of weeks ago. You'd get guys from the LIV Tour saying, no, that is not true. The price, and what that means is that if you sign a $200 million contract and you're Phil Mickelson, presumably you don't get any money that you win in these. If you win first place and get $4 million, you don't get that money until you've earned $200 million on the golf course. It's like a record label giving you an advance for your upcoming album. That's the way that this is being understood, which has been denied by LIV Golf. But the LIV lawyer just came out and said it today.
Yeah. So I think what's going on here is the truth is somewhere in the middle, because you tweeted that out and that is what was said, but there was like an interlude there where the lawyer said, oh, but not all the contracts are the same. Right.
That was always my assumption, is that Brooks's contract is different than Charles Howell III's contract.
Totally. And I think what, like, there was a weird moment at the Portland event. I tweeted out the video of it where reporters were pressing. It was that crazy Koepka, Pat Perez, and who else was up there? Oh, Patrick Reed. Mm-hmm. That weird presser that they had, and somebody was pressing Brooks on this question, whether money is earned against your contract, and his answer was super unconvincing. Like either he just genuinely didn't know, or he was confused, like, about how his contract worked versus Charles Howell III's. And there was a woman, I presume she was running the press conference, I don't know who it was, that in the background said, all these contracts are separate from money earned in the events.
Right.
I don't know if that's the exact wording, which I should probably get right, but that was the gist of it. And then that, like that is not true, right? It's not, it might be true for like a couple guys, but based on what this lawyer said today, that's not true for everybody. So I think the reality is that the truth of it is, like, I don't think everybody's getting, like, earning against their contracts, but I also don't think all the contracts are guaranteed and you get money on top of that in the tournament. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle of that.
When I remember that presser, and when I heard this today, I went back and watched it. I remembered them all being very unsure.
Yes,
of
they
what
were. Yeah.
And they were doing a lot of looking around, and they weren't committal. And when I went back and watched it today, Brooks eventually got there to, like, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. And then there was a follow-up question that said, well, how about for the other two of you, talking to Pat Perez and Patrick Reed? And they were both just, they didn't know what to say. I mean,
nobody said anything. I think Brooks said something like, no, I don't know. Who cares? Like, why are we like, it was like, the whole thing was very strange. And I mean, I feel like there were a ton of things today that I either learned or got clarity on, or I don't know. It was like, I was kind of joking earlier, but I thought it was incredibly compelling to watch, people under oath talk about what's actually going on.
Are they under oath, Sia? I'm glad you brought that up, because I mean, Twitter lawyering is amazing. Are you under oath every time you step into a courtroom, or do lawyers take this, like, overall oath of something? Like, what's the deal?
Well, it's both. You take an overall oath of something, but it's not like it's perjury if you misrepresent something to the court. There's a code of ethics that we're all bound by. And if you violate that code of ethics by misrepresenting or straight up lying to the court, then there's penalties for that, whether that's a penalty that pertains to your case or to your bar license, things like that. So yeah, you need to be kind of on the up and up. But I can tell you from practicing law and trial law and doing these motions, these types of motions, not antitrust motions per se, but these types of motions in front of a court, there's people that misrepresent things all the time. And the truth of the matter is, courts typically are so overwhelmed that they don't really have the capacity to handle some of the misrepresentation. So they just kind of let it go and wait for the next hearing and hope it all gets parsed out. So long story short, yeah, they are bound by a code of ethics. They are bound by just the sanction rules that can be impressed upon them. But that doesn't mean they don't misrepresent things quite a bit.
Let's go through the highlights.
We don't have time.
We also learned
There's
that
so many.
the LIV guys are contracted to wear LIV stuff, right? So there was kind of an argument about, if you let these three come back, are they bound by their LIV contract that requires them to wear LIV golf stuff, or are they going to then be doing damage to the PGA Tour if they do wear that stuff?
That was really silly. That was really silly. We wasted a lot of time on that.
They wasted a lot of time on that.
That was ridiculous.
I was confused because the LIV lawyer late. I think the judge messed that up. The LIV lawyer later said that the reference in that, I guess in the contracts, was uniforms at some point, not to, like, the only player, well, there's a couple, but the prominent player that's wearing LIV golf gear is Patrick Reed, right? And he's not even involved in any of this. So I think the judge was like, and maybe even the PGA Tour lawyer was confused about what, like, the gear was referencing. I can't believe I'm talking about any of this, by the way.
Well, first of all, to the extent
I'm talking about Crusher's gear in a courtroom in Northern California, how it affects the future of professional golf.
I mean, you can put in any order. There's an order signed at the end of this hearing because there was a ruling involved. Like, you can put in any order, like, LIV players are to not wear LIV gear, during the FedEx Cup playoffs. And obviously the LIV attorneys would have signed off on that. So the fact that they spent like 5-6 minutes on that was like really, truly silly. By the way, welcome to the first cut, where Rick goes back and watches press conference tape. Bravo, my friend.
Got to grind the film. A couple of other nuggets here. Let's see. At one point, the PGA Tour used their own PIP rankings in which they said, hey, here are the 10 most popular golfers. And they said, look, 5 of them have gone to LIV. And they basically said, we can't possibly be a monopoly. We can't be stopping competition because our own system said these guys are popular and we lost half of them. That happened today.
Well, and LIV said we're going to have 20% market share, or they filed something like that in the original lawsuit. And the judge was like, wait, that's not a monopoly. Like, that's crazy. And so, like, and people have talked about that leading up to it, is that it's almost like LIV's success is sort of like preventing it from arguing that it's not having success, which is essentially what it's trying to say about the PGA Tour.
Oh my gosh, there was a couple of other things. If this goes to trial, Sia, at the very end of this, they were saying basically this can go to trial. We can do it at a date in 2023. I forget what the date is, but basically, if you're not ready by then and you want to push it, my next available date's 2025. So, like, if you think this is going to get resolved quickly, I promise you it is not.
Yeah, no case does. I had cases in South Florida that were 7-8 years old before they were resolved. Now, granted, the majority are somewhere in the 2 to 4 year range. And some of those don't even go to trial, by the way. So a lot of those are 75% through the maturity of the case. And then they ultimately get settled, and it's 3, 4, 5 years later. So in a case like this, I mean, certainly at least, I don't know which side has more incentive to get it resolved quicker. But the point is, these things get delayed for so many reasons. There's literally 100 reasons to delay a case other than just the actual schedule of the judge. So yeah, this matter isn't going anywhere anytime soon unless the parties decide to sit down and somehow resolve it.
I want to get to the Cam Smith stuff, which is also amazing. But Kyle, anything else in regards to, I mean, there's so much, but in this hearing, we had basically, they just alluded to the fact that even like whatever Talor Gooch could win in the FedEx Cup playoffs pales in comparison to what he has already signed for LIV. That was kind of, they did not say figures, but that was alluded to. What else should we hit on before we go to Cam Smith?
Well, the judge was she was incredible. I thought she was very appropriately snarky throughout. She wasn't demeaning, but she just always had this smile on her face, like, you guys are clowns. Like, I can't believe we're doing this. And she was fantastic. And I thought she asked good questions. Like, she asked questions that you should ask in that situation. I felt like the LIV lawyers like they got a lot of stuff wrong, and it was little stuff that maybe only people like idiots like us would notice, but they didn't seem as prepared as I would have, I think, imagined coming into the day. What else?
So Kyle, let me ask you, I want to ask you guys this, because maybe I'm confused. But when it comes to the LIV attorneys, I think you might be right. But tell me, there's monetary damages potentially, which basically got dismissed for good reason because they're making a ton of money over on the LIV tour. But the non-monetary damages, can you, like, from a LIV attorney's standpoint, what are those? That's the ability to participate in a big event. Is that the extent of it?
He was trying to make the argument that this is the gateway to the majors, essentially,
which is true.
Well, see, that's the thing. Go ahead, Kyle.
In that the top 30 get into the Masters, the top 30 get into, I think, the U.S. Open and Open Championship, maybe all 4 majors. So
here's the thing. This is why I think the ruling was wrong, is because she is making you use the word calculated. She's making a calculation as it pertains to money. But there was also, and the LIV attorneys didn't do a good job articulating this, but there's also a non-monetary damages portion of this, which is access to these tournaments, which is winning a big event like the FedEx Cup Playoffs, whatever, whether you want to call that a Super Bowl or whatever.
Right.
That non-monetary part, which she deemed speculative. Now, speculative is not tantamount to inconsequential. So that's essentially what she was doing, was saying that it's speculative, and I don't even want to think about that because it's not, that speculation isn't consequential enough for me to factor it in. I think that's where she got it wrong. She doesn't have enough facts at this stage of the game to actually make that determination, and that's why I thought she was going to follow the ruling that we had across the pond, where those players got access to the Scottish Open. Slightly different situation, but I thought that's where she was going ultimately.
Yeah, and I think my follow-up to that would be, what if again, Scotty Scheffler's not involved? What if it was Scotty Scheffler? Like, he's number 1 in the FedEx Cup. And like, is it different because it was guys that are 20th and 70th and 90th or whatever? I don't know what they are.
She was kind of implying that it was different because of that.
I thought 20th was pretty good. Like, that's what I thought. Good. I would have said that's pretty good.
It did feel like she was implying that a little bit, and that's
doesn't she know that the points are quadrupled in the playoffs, Kyle?
Well, I thought we were gonna get. I legitimately thought one of us might get a phone call about, like, hey, what's the deal with how does the FedEx Cup playoffs work? Which, who knows if I'd even be able to explain that. But
Jacob said Nosferatu is going to be a key witness in this trial when they have to get to the OWGR.
For sure. He might be the thing. He might be who the whole thing hinges on at some point. Yeah, I don't like, is there okay, I'm glad we have Sia on here, because we would not be doing this well, Rick. But if the judge had ruled that the damages were irreparable for reasons that we're mentioning, stuff like you could get into and win the Masters conceivably, you could get into the US Open next year, whatever. Do you think that she would have ruled in favor of LIV or the LIV players?
Yes. So she doesn't have to make the determination that it's irreparable harm. She has to make the determination that there is a likelihood or a good chance of irreparable harm. And again, when you're talking about a temporary restraining order, you're talking about an emergency order that is, you're trying to make it without knowing all the facts, without knowing all the legal arguments, because there's just not time to have that happen. That's where the emergency part comes in, where you have to make a quick ruling. So to me, when you're doing a cost benefit analysis as a judge, you either let these 3 guys play and add 3 guys to the tournament, or you potentially deprive them of the non-monetary portion of this irreparable harm. So yeah, if she had deemed that there was a likelihood of irreparable harm, she would have had to have ruled in favor of LIV, of those 3 players specifically.
I do wonder if and by the way, it was amazing when she called it the Federal Express St. Jude Championship. We should go with that from now on. But
she's already got this whole thing figured out.
Yeah, it might have been a wink, wink, like I'm in on the joke. But I wonder if LIV's sort of ethos, which is like, look, money is all that matters. Like, economic benefit is the only thing that matters. actually worked against it in this specific scenario, because I think you could get to a position where you're like, well, if that's true, then the economic benefit is there. Like you sign the contracts knowing that you were going to lose out on that. And that's a pretty big implication. And maybe it's too far down the road for a judge to get there. But I do wonder if their only emphasis is on money, money, money. And that's all they talk about. And that's like the biggest thing. I do wonder if that maybe went against them in this specific case.
One more thing before I forget, and this is probably part of a different antitrust case further down the road, but the Judge Freeman did not she called it the PGA Tour, quote, strong arming all of its contacts and vendors. So basically, I don't know if Jay says, hey, you do business with these guys, you're not going to have business with us, but they're talking about, apparel companies.
That was in the lawsuit.
Yeah. Which I imagine Jay Monahan would be, reaching out to all of his contacts to curry support, but that is, I guess, not competitive.
Well, that will be the subject of his 3-day-long deposition if discovery goes through its regular course.
Okay. Final thoughts. We'll go to Cam Smith. Anything else? I mean, there's a million other things, but anything else we got to get in?
I feel I think a little bit of confusion over there were so many things that were talked about, and again, it was irreparable harm or irreparable damages was what it hinged on, but it feels like there were like 4 or 5 other things that it could have hinged on, and I would have believed, or not believed, but I would have been like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, of course it would hinge on whether or not this is a I don't even know. Like, I think my biggest issue today was I didn't even know what the crux of what we were arguing was. Well, there are a ton of things to argue about, as we have done for the last 6 months, but I don't know like what the most important ones actually are.
I think they figured it out as they were going along almost, right? It was like they were doing this dance. I thought it was going to be much shorter than that. I legit thought LIV was going to get up there for 15 minutes. The PGA Tour was going to do like a 10-minute. It was like 2.5 hours long, 2 hours and 45 minutes. Like, I was not expecting all of that, and they were figuring out as they go. They were arguing it. I was surprised.
I guess I'm maybe surprised at what we talked about earlier, Sia, that when you're suspended, you can appeal and still, by the PGA Tour handbook or whatever you sign, still participate in the PGA Tour. I'm surprised that wasn't what it hinged on, and it was almost like this sort of like side thing that is adjacent to and related to that, but it didn't. Maybe it wasn't the exact thing that I maybe thought would be the main thing.
It sounded like a big deal at the time, but yeah, I don't know how that really factored in ultimately, because it really did come down to the elements of how you succeed on a temporary or emergency restraining order. And in that first element, the primary element, I should say, would be that likelihood of success, or I should say likelihood of irreparable harm. And if you don't get past that hurdle, then most of the other stuff doesn't matter. Although I will say that procedural element did seem pretty compelling. However, don't forget, in that handbook or in those provisions, Jay Monahan does have the discretion. He kind of has that catch-all that he can, I think, that he can suspend anybody for like any reason. But then again, there's that appeal thing. It's kind of circular. So yeah, I hear you.
The other massive wrinkle in all of this is Cameron Smith, who actually had a press conference while all this was going on. We're going to talk about that. But first, we're going to take a quick break and hear a word from our partners. And we're back. During this 2-hour and 45-minute hearing, Cameron Smith is in Memphis preparing for the FedEx St. Jude Championship. The Telegraph has confirmed, reported, whatever you want to say, that he has already signed a $100 million deal to join LIV. So literally, Kyle, this couldn't have worked out any better. They take the 15-minute recess in the hearing, and we get Cam Smith's presser, which lasted about 3.5 minutes, because he was asked about his ties to LIV, which I actually believe, Jacob, if we let's run it. I think we have this.
Yeah. My goal here is to win the FedEx Cup Playoffs. That's all I'm here for. If there's something I need to say regarding the PGA Tour or LIV, it will come from Cameron Smith, not Cameron Percy. I'm a man of my word, and whenever you guys need to know anything, it'll be said by me.
And just following up on that, you being a man of your word, you know, the Telegraph is reporting that you've signed and are going. Would you like to say yes or no to that?
I have no comment to that. Like I said, I'm here to play the FedEx Cup Playoffs. That's been my focus the last week and a half. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to win the FedEx Cup Playoffs. And like I said, it'll come from me. It won't come from Cameron Percy.
Do you intend to play the President's Cup?
Absolutely, yeah. That's something that we've been looking forward to for the last 3 years. We missed a year because of COVID, and that's something that I look forward to being a part of.
No comment, Kyle.
Yeah. I mean, it's not great. Like if I'm reading between the lines and, you know, the Telegraph's report, Telegraph's had at least a couple of these like nailed down.
You can always be wrong on this. The Telegraph's been pretty good. And it's very hard to report on this stuff. As we've talked about a lot, the Telegraph has a pretty good record. Not that they couldn't be wrong, but they've had a pretty good record.
I would now be surprised. I mean, so at the Open Championship, what was that? Like a month ago now?
Feels like
it was. It does. Remember when Rory was going to win the Open? It was Cam and Hideki were the two names that you kept on hearing. Now, the caveat there is you hear, like, when you're out there for a week and you experience this at the U.S. Open, Rick, you hear every name. It's like, well,
every single name. It's
like, well, not everybody's going, but you do hear some names more than others from all these people that you talk to. And it's a little bit of a game of telephone, but there was a lot of smoke around Cam and around Hideki, probably even more so around Hideki, honestly. I think I would be surprised now if Cam didn't leave, right? Like, I would be actually surprised if Cam Smith is playing on the PGA Tour at the start of 2023. That doesn't mean he won't. That doesn't mean that this report is absolutely correct, but that's sort of where I'm at with this. And I think the thing that I think of, Rick, is not just so this would be a coup for LIV. Obviously, he's the number 2 player in the world, but also because you get the Open champion, you get the Players champion, and you might get the PGA Tour Player of the Year, which doesn't mean a lot broadly in the sports world, but for the LIV to be like, okay, we have the most recent major champion, we have your tour's best tournaments champion, and we have your Player of the Year. Oh yeah, and they're all the same guy. Like, that sucks for the PGA Tour, right? And so I think for a lot of reasons, like, Cam is a perfect candidate because he's not, you know, this is like the PGA Tour is the tour he plays on. I don't know that he's super connected to it. He didn't grow up here. And like, you know, I think globally people are not as connected to the PGA Tour as some fans might think that they are. And he's also like checks so many boxes that LIV wants to hold over the PGA Tour's head. And now they might be able to if he ends up going.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the marketing that usually goes into your Players champion, the marketing that goes into your FedEx Cup champ. I mean, literally 40 times a day on the broadcast, Sia, they run the ad for the FedEx Cup, and it always shows the most recent winner hoisting the FedEx Cup. It might be Patrick Cantlay for a whole nother year, or maybe they're going to have to resource some other ads because you could potentially get, or seemingly you're going to get Cam Smith. I agree. It's a big get. We do a lot of reading between the lines. If you add up the Telegraph story, generally speaking, a no comment means you're going. Like, we can add up. We've seen some other guys go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going. You don't handle like he did great handling that question. I mean, he knew what he wanted to say, and that's fine. But I don't think you handle that question or the follow-up question. By the way, props to whoever asked him the follow-up question.
Shane Ryan, wasn't it, Kyle?
Shane Ryan, I think, asked all the questions.
Okay, legitimately, he was only asked questions by Shane Ryan, and there was one other question. The thing lasted 3.5 minutes. Shane handled the whole thing.
Well, props to Shane, because that follow-up question was, you know, it's the only follow-up question you could ask as it pertained to the first question. So, yeah, I don't think you answer a question like that unless you're going. I mean, if you, at this stage of the game, if you don't know that you're going, I'd be really, really surprised. And so he didn't want to say yes because he's in the middle of the FedEx Cup playoffs. And I guess he doesn't want that heat, although he knows he's getting it now. But in his position, I would have answered it the same way if I were going, and that's why I think he's going.
I mean, he's a great candidate, Kyle, for all the reasons that you said, but also from his perspective, if you look at it and say, I get to play for 18 million now, I'm going to sign for probably 100. And also if at any point the majors ban LIV guys, but they do respect the guys who have already had exemptions, or basically like if we get no OWGR points, I can still get into major. Like he's the guy to get to this phrase that we've been saying over and over again, have his cake and eat it too.
Yeah, he is in a perfect it's really, in the same way that DJ was a great kind of lead candidate just because he's DJ, and I mean there's 1,000 reasons, but Cam, it's a little bit, if he goes, it's a perfect marriage from both sides, right? Because Cam's like, well, I'm in all the majors for at least 5 years, is that right?
Yeah.
And so I'm good there. I'm gonna win however much money in the FedEx Cup, so I'm good there. And oh, by the way, my LIV contract went from 100 million to probably 140 million or whatever, 30, 20. So I'm good there. And yeah, I think the question that I think about, and I haven't, I mean, bullets were flying this afternoon. We're just trying to get our, minds wrapped around 8 different things at once, is how problematic is Cam Smith leaving? Like how problematic for the PGA Tour is Cam Smith leaving? Obviously the PGA Tour is in, I think, a lot more trouble than it thought it would be in, than we thought it would be in 6 months ago, even 4 months ago. Right. And I Cam Smith is problematic because he's the number 2 player in the world, but 2 years ago, Cam Smith is no different than Abraham Answer, right? Who has now gone to LIV. I almost picked Abraham Answer in our one and done this week, by the way. I forgot he was playing LIV Golf.
That would have been just chef's kiss.
I had his name written in, and I was like, did he go to LIV? I honestly can't remember at this point. And so I'll pose that to you guys. How problematic is Cam Smith? How problematic for the PGA Tour is Cam Smith leaving for LIV Golf?
It's way worse if he wins the FedEx Cup, for sure. I think it's a big deal. I think it's horrible.
I think it's a big deal, but I think it's only a big deal because we keep looking at things in the present and not the future. We have I've said this a couple of times, we've had such an influx of stars like that. We actually kind of deem stars right now, like Cameron Young, Mito Pereira, has kind of fallen off a little bit. Davis Riley, there's a lot of good young talent that, again, given the right marketing from the PGA Tour and from some of these broadcasts, I think they can supplant these guys, especially the way they're structured. I mean, it's kind of finite with the number of players and the number of teams. I suppose if they were to expand, it would be a different story. But a lot of the guys over there are kind of guys that are past their prime or injury prone or what have you. Don't get me wrong, they have stars. That's great. But there's stars here too. It's just a matter of them coming through the Korn Ferry Tour and all these other tours and being marketed properly.
It does feel a little bit like we're getting to a sort of equilibrium with the tours, to where they're just going to kind of coexist for a period of time. After, I think there'll be some more dust to settle this fall with guys potentially like Cam, maybe Hideki, maybe some others that have been talked about. I don't know where that's going to end, but as you look toward 2023, 2024, I think the thing that is remarkable to me is, like, are we going to have to start covering LIV as a serious product, not as a serious threat to the PGA Tour, but as like its tournaments as a serious product? Because at some point you do have to do that. Like if everybody in the top 48 player, if all the top 48 players in the world play in the LIV event in Boston, you have to cover it as a serious product. Like, that's sort of our job. We're not there yet, but Cam is one more mark, or one more step toward that. And I don't know, like, when we get to that tipping point of having to seriously cover, this Doral event with 54 holes and talk about, like, what Patrick Reed was thinking on the 17th hole in the third round on a Sunday. You know, I don't know. Like, have you thought about that, Rick?
Yeah, I have. And I think there's, it's really difficult because we're just going to have to decide when it's serious enough, right? Like nothing's going to happen, right? It's not going to be like one golfer goes and now we have to take it more seriously. It's just, we're going to wake up one morning and be like, all right, like half the best players in the world are there. Like this is an event that's happening and there's people that are in, like, if people are interested in it, right? Like, I don't think there's going to be a moment, but we'll know.
Well, I think what's really interesting is, so we, like the three of us primarily cover the PGA Tour, right? And the major championships. And we'll dabble in like LPGA majors and some European Tour stuff if the events are compelling, some Corn Ferry stuff when it comes time to relegation and all those different things. What is been established in 2022, and I think is solidified by the Cam Smith, again, if he goes, is LIV Golf is now the second best golf tour in the world, right? There's, if they get Cam and let's say one other guy, there's not really an argument against that. Like they are clearly the second best golf tour in the world and gaining a little bit on the best on the PGA Tour. And so I don't know what to do with that. And I don't mean that in like an existential way. I just like logistically, like we don't, traditionally we have not talked about or covered the second best tour that often, but I don't know. Like it's just, it's a really like bizarre thing.
We've talked about this before, Sia, where I think there's a really good chance that we know a lot more answers and see the writing on the wall, like by April of next year, just because I think that's like, there's a chance that LIV Golf is at its absolute strongest April of 2023, right? Because you'll get the guys that stayed for the Tour Championship, that stayed for the President's Cup. Who knows what the major championships are going to do? I want to see what the recruitment process is 2023 and on, right? Because you'd assume, I know there's not a money issue, but you assume it's not $200 million contracts for everybody indefinitely, right?
Right.
So I think that's what's most interesting to me is the perception of that tour to golfers starting in like 6 months and moving forward.
I agree, but I also think that even in, let's picture April 2023. Let's say they're still viable. They're still getting some of the Cam Smiths of the world. I mean, this is not a situation where there's going to be a watered down PGA Tour and a great LIV Tour, or a watered down LIV Tour if they continue to get stars, and a great PGA Tour. I think this is one of the very few examples, if not the only example, where two leagues can coexist and both be elite or both be great. And again, I'm not calling LIV great now, but the manner in which they're recruiting and getting some stars, they absolutely have the potential to be great with the structure that they have in place. I only say that because we talked last week, Kyle, about the analogy of, hey, don't you want one great sports league? And I think the answer to that is unequivocal yes, especially when it comes to like the NFL. Like the NFL and the XFL, completely different ball game. Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, it's just a different product altogether. You could even potentially make the argument for NBA and the European, leagues and Asian leagues and whatnot for basketball. But here, I think it's a little different. I think you would actually, because your original question was, will we cover that league? I think the reality is, even if that league is successful, the PGA Tour will still be very successful, and both leagues can coexist without sort of that watered down feel that we have with the other sports. So regardless of LIV's success, I think the PGA Tour is fine. And I also think if we get to a place where both leagues are in a very successful and viable place, I think that's also fine. I mean, forgetting about all the political stuff that comes with that, I just think from a pure watching sports standpoint, I think both are very potentially viable.
That's interesting. I think it's weird. Golf's weird because you would never say what you just said about the NBA, right? You would never say like, man, what would be awesome is another NBA. And I'm not saying you're saying that LIV is awesome, but and I think sometimes people like people that follow us or fans or whatever are like, why are you guys freaking out? Can you imagine what people would do if another NBA just sort of like spawned out of nowhere, or another NFL? People would be pitchforks and torches, like just taking the streets of America. Like everybody would be losing it. And I think because golf is a smaller sport, it's super niche, all the things that we've talked about, it's like all this is like sort of flown under the mainstream sports radar. I think people looked up when they played at Trump Bedminster and were like, wait, what's going on over there? Yeah. And so I forgot what my original. So can 2 weeks go? Golf is weird because stars don't play every week anyway, and so there's this sort of in between space that can be filled up a little bit. And I think that's sort of what you're insinuating or getting at with LIV Golf. I don't know, man. Like the next couple of years are going to be incredibly interesting, and honestly, it's been, as you guys would probably agree with, exhausting. Like I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that a foreign government is like co-opting a professional sports league, and like it's exhausting. But there's also no shortage of things to talk about, right? We would be talking about the T7 guy at the Wyndham, like what, like that is not nearly as compelling as what I watched today in a courtroom in Northern California. So I think there is a little bit of, I'm super compelled by it. And I think given like some of our traffic numbers and how much people are paying attention, I think fans are incredibly compelled by it too.
Yeah. And we'll kind of put a pin in it there, but people, whether you say you don't care about it or not, people tune in when you start talking about it or you start writing about it. And I
mean, the number of friends that I have, they're like, hey, tell me about, like, what's your opinion on this? And they never ask that about like the memorial or the,
what's your opinion on LIV? I'm like, oh boy.
Well, first,
I got a lot to go through.
That was one of my notes, is pick a better name. Like if it's going to be talked about in courts and by lawyers and judges, that's a crappy name. And I know it's like 4 months old now, but that's just stupid. And also, we got to have some sort of like national referendum on PGA and PGA Tour, because they were being used interchangeably today. It's an abomination. It should be against the law. It was super confusing, and people never know what you're talking about.
We got off to a hot start when it was Phil Mickelson et al. Versus whatever. I was like, oh boy, we were off to a roaring start here.
So good.
Can I pop in and just say that right there, and like watching that today is a humbling experience of just how many people outside of our bubble watch and care about professional golf.
Correct. We're in a bubble.
Yeah. And that's sort of what I'm referencing with people not even really know, like mainstream sports people not even really knowing, like, wait, Saudi Arabia is playing at a Trump course in New Jersey. Like, is Tiger, what's up with Tiger? Like that's what it always leads back to. And it's just, it's been a strange experience to be like, not freaking out about this, but like laboring to understand all this when mainstream sports people, whether fans or reporters or whatever, are just kind of like not even really know what's going on. It's the whole thing has been a very strange experience from the inside.
And it will continue to be. And we will continue to talk about it. And I'm sure much, much more is coming down the road. And guess what? First Cut Pod has you covered. We'll also do round by round recaps this week after each and every round of the FedEx St. Jude Championship and the rest of the way here in the FedEx Cup Playoffs. But for now, big thanks to producer Jacob. Does all the hard work behind the scenes. Multiple pods today. Giddy up. Sia Nejad, thank you very much. Available on Twitter at Sia Nejad. Kyle Porter at Kyle Porter CBS. And you can find me at Rick Run Good. This has been The First Cut. We'll catch you next time.